All right. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's really awesome to be here. I am so excited to share this talk with you all because this subject is something I've been thinking about almost constantly for the past year. And I've been talking about it to a lot of my non-design friends, and I think they're kind of sick of hearing about it. So it's nice to have an attentive audience. Um, So just to provide a little bit of context, last year I began working with this small video hosting company called Sprout Video. They're actually based in Greenpoint in Brooklyn, which is pretty funny because Tobias and I are basically neighbors and didn't know it until today. But yeah, so Sprout Video has been around for about 4 years. This is our new marketing site that we just launched recently. Yeah, so as I said, they've been around for about 4 years. We have some really amazing clients and just this incredible set of features. And the funny thing about that is, for the first 3 years of this organization existing, there was just one employee. Our CEO is also our front-end engineer, is also our back-end engineer, and he built the entire platform. So what that means for me is, when I started, this is what our site looked like. Adam actually bought this 4 years ago off one of those theme marketplaces where you can get a design for like 40 bucks. And he had used this for our marketing site and our product. So when I first joined, I was super excited because this is a great opportunity to see how design can impact a product with a strong foundation and engaged users. But as the lead and only designer, I was responsible for all of these things. So my first challenge was really just to figure out how to kind of broaden my design knowledge across the board. Traditionally, I've been focused in one role or another because I worked with large organizations that had a lot of specialists. So we didn't really have to juggle a lot of different roles and wear a lot of different hats. So this has actually been a great opportunity to kind of become more of a generalist and be able to sort of transition fluidly between a lot of different disciplines in design. So to that end, I've been reading tons of books and articles and watching a lot of talks about things like content strategy or product strategy, the kind of stuff that you don't sort of typically get if you're focused mainly on visual design. And while I was doing all this research, this one word kept coming up over and over again: empathy. This is something we hear about a lot nowadays. And I'm sure when you guys first saw this slide, you probably groaned a little bit inside because I think we're all kind of sick of hearing about it. And I think the reason for that is that this is what we think about when we think of empathy, right? We imagine it's sort of the purview of self-help books about compassion and kindness and togetherness. So at least that's what I used to think of it as. So when I would hear about it, this is sort of my reaction. And this is a tweet that Zeldman posted a while back, and I was like, yeah, fuck empathy. But that was because I hadn't really fully delved into it and I misconstrued the way that it related to what we do. And I think that's really a big part of why a lot of us are resistant to thinking about how empathy relates to design. There's kind of many different types of empathy, and when I talk about it, and what I've sort of come to understand after researching it further, is that there are 3 ways that empathy really can relate to what we do. User empathy is the ability to understand the feelings of users. That's pretty obvious and straightforward. But with this understanding, we can design solutions that are more effective than we can with any other information we have. So empathy comes from having repeated and purposeful exposure to our users. So we'll kind of explore each of these ideas in turn, but I want to begin with the idea that empathy is really the foundation of creating better work. So let's consider first what it is that really determines the success of our designs. The goal of design, sort of broadly defined, is to provide the best possible solutions for real human needs. This sounds pretty simple, but as we all know, it can be very complex. There's infinite potential solutions for any given design problem. And we have to narrow down these solutions through the use of constraints. So when I talk about constraints, really what I'm talking about are the kind of data points that inform the choices we make throughout the design process. And here's what the legendary designer Charles Eames had to say about the use of constraints. So basically, we want to just be able to uncover the constraints that are going to be the most useful in our work, and then we want to be able to apply them enthusiastically. So I want to talk a little bit about where we typically kind of find this data that informs the decisions we make. I think for many of us, we get sort of the framework for how we're going to create our designs from what organizations tell us, right? Somebody hires us and we ask them what are their business goals, what are like the needs of their organizations and the limits of what they can do. And then that's kind of it. We just design something that we think fits in that box that will get us quickly through the approval process. Also, because we're designers, we of course place a lot of emphasis on beauty. And we think, how can I solve this problem in the most beautiful way possible? So these are both really useful ways to frame a problem. I mean, it's good that we consider them because, of course, designs will fail without the support of the organization that initiated them. And also, the world would be a terrible place if we didn't value the aesthetic component of what we do. But there is a third factor that we have to consider that actually gives us the most valuable information. And of course, that's the needs of the users. Without considering this, a lot of times our designs will fail. And we've seen this many times, I'm sure, but I want to talk about two examples of that. Both of these examples are from my childhood, and both are from the soda industry. So the first story actually comes from Coca-Cola. In the mid-'80s, around when I was born, Coca-Cola was suffering big time. They were like in this fierce battle for market share with Pepsi, and also people's just general interest in soda was on the decline. So this had the shareholders at Coca-Cola in a total panic. And so the executives at Coke started thinking, okay, well, what's the best way we can make people want to buy more of this? Why don't we just add the things that make soda so addictive and compelling? So basically, they took this 100-year-old formula for Coca-Cola and added more sugar, salt, and caffeine. They conducted some blind taste tests, and across the board, people said that they loved this new formula. They thought it tasted great. So Coke went ahead and launched it. They completely rebranded under this new Coke brand. And to the surprise of the people who initiated this idea, people were completely upset by it. Like, even though they thought it tasted great, they were furious that Coke would throw out this, like, 100-year-old, people had grown up with the taste of Coca-Cola, and they really had strong feelings for this brand. There were literally protests outside the Coca-Cola headquarters, and people started hoarding old Coke in like massive quantities. So it was kind of great because Coke created this new formula to counter Pepsi and to really wipe them out of the market, but it completely backfired. And Pepsi actually created an ad to this effect that's pretty funny.
What's the matter, Wilbur?
They changed my Coke.
Something wrong with it?
I know, they sure changed it.
Could have asked.
What coulda? I stuck with them through 3 wars and a couple of dust storms, but this is too much. Guess something big made them change.
Right, big.
Right big. Pepsi, the choice of a new generation.
Still could have asked.
So in case you guys didn't catch that at the end, the old guy says, they still could have asked, which I think is pretty funny because it's telling of the one thing that Coke failed to do, which was to consider what users actually wanted. So in reaction to this completely botched idea, Coke had to launch a new kind of brand and campaign, which was that of Coca-Cola Classic. And this might be the Coke that you all are familiar with and kind of grew up with. And the reason that classic is on the label is because they were trying to remind people that they were still the same Coke you've always known and loved, and new Coke is gone, we promise, we'll never mention it again. So they created this ridiculous campaign that's like, all American fun, hang out and be beautiful with Coke. So in reaction to this whole sort of failure, the president of Coca-Cola had this to say about what they'd done. And I think this quote is really telling because it gives us insight into the most powerful factor that determines the success of our products, which is the feelings of users. This is now sort of a case study that's taught in business school for what happens when the needs of shareholders outweigh the needs of users. And this is a quote from Sam Craig, who's the professor of marketing at NYU. But it's funny because a lot of failed enterprises make this same mistake. They never stop to ask, do users even want a new thing? So this is a good example of what happens when business goals kind of are the priority or the main constraint that people apply to their work. But I mentioned another one, which is a lot of times when we're working, we have a tendency to only consider what's beautiful to us as designers or what's sort of trendy in the moment. And there's a great example of this also from the soda industry. So how many of you kind of grew up like in the early 90s and remember when clear everything was a big deal? Am I the only one? Okay. Well, basically in the mid-90s, there was this huge trend for clear liquids. It was thought to be like a symbol of purity and health, and that's what prompted the launch of Zima, if anyone remembers that. It was like this disgusting malt beverage that they were like, clear malt. Miller actually made a clear beer that was supposed to be healthier. Amoco Gasoline produced gasoline that was completely transparent, although they got sued because they were claiming it was better for the environment, and it wasn't. But anyways, I think the greatest example of this whole clear liquid trend was Crystal Pepsi. Crystal Pepsi as a product was like a designer's wet dream because they got to take this kind of gross-looking thing, which is soda, and make it like clear and pure and glorious. And when they launched this product, they also got to design all this incredible stuff using brand new computers that were like just becoming available to designers at the time. So one of the cool things they did around Crystal Pepsi is this incredible ad for the Super Bowl, actually, which I'll just sit back. Hello? Oh, good. So here's that. Pretty impressive, right? That's like my favorite thing because you can tell they were just like, holy shit, we have 15 fonts, let's use all of them. And we have stock video footage of a guy in his underwear flying in the sky. So anyways, the other awesome thing that the agency got to create out of Crystal Pepsi was the first like photorealistic bus wrap, which was like a huge revolution at the time. Designers were like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do that. Like, computers are so exciting. So anyways, the point is Crystal Pepsi was thrilling for the designers that worked on it, but ended up, of course, being a complete and utter failure. Here's what the creative director at the agency that initiated Crystal Pepsi had to say about his work. So he says, a lot of times as a leader, you think, they don't get it. They don't see my vision. People were saying that we should stop and address some issues along the way, and they were right. It would have been nice if we made sure the product tasted good first. So I feel like this is something we've probably heard a lot in the tech industry and maybe even been guilty of ourselves. We create these kind of incredible visuals that take advantage of the latest technology, and they're a lot of fun, but if the experience ends up being shit or nobody wants to use it, like the product is still gonna fail. So some of you might be thinking, okay, this is like old news. First of all, the case studies you're using are from like 2 decades ago and a different industry. And by now we know better, right? Like we know we have to put the needs of the users first. The thing is, I feel like about once a month, a new like post-mortem on a failed startup comes out. And so I've been like kind of keeping track of those as I've been working on this talk. And here's just a few quotes from some of the ones that I've seen. So this is the CEO of a failed startup called VoterTide talking about how he regrets that they never bothered to talk to customers and they just kept doing what they thought was great. Here's another one from the CEO of a failed startup called Zillion Ears, which realized way too late that nobody actually liked their product or thought it was cool. And one more, the CEO of Hello Parking, another failed startup, is talking about how he wishes that they had ever met with actual users and had more meaningful conversations with them. So I think we all just sort of need to get on board and agree that real human needs are really the most valuable thing that we have to frame the work we're doing as designers. We may have heard this truth before, but we tend to not put it into practice. And so I want to kind of frame this in terms of another thing that we hear stakeholders talk to us about a lot, or kind of entrepreneurs talk about a lot, which is this word innovation. I realize it's kind of become a joke to us now because it's thrown at us all the time. We have to be innovative. We want to innovate in the pet shopping space or whatever. But I think we need to start thinking a little bit about what we can do to actually be innovative in our UX, and that doesn't come from just doing whatever meets the business goals or is in line with the latest visual trends. So what does actually create innovative designs? This is a quote from Jared Spool answering that question for us. He says, "Innovation happens when you add value for the users. Teams with more exposure to how real people use their designs can try new ideas to whittle away the user's frustrations and see how those ideas pan out. This makes them smarter and more informed so they can make better decisions in the long run," which is what hopefully we all want to be doing in our jobs. So let's explore the reasons, assuming that we're all on board with the idea that we need to get closer to the users to do better work. Let's talk a little bit about why we resist this idea and how we can kind of overcome that resistance. I think a lot of us tend to think that user research belongs with someone else. It's something that a UX specialist should do. Or maybe we just think, I really don't even know where I would begin if I was going to be talking to my users. I think a lot of us tend to fear that it's going to raise some really inconvenient questions about the purpose of our business or sort of our core assumptions about how our design should work. We also tend to think of research as being expensive and time-consuming. And also a lot of us assume, I already know my users. Like, I don't need to talk to them. I know what people want when they're choosing a video host, for example. So I just want to kind of reassure everybody here that getting to know the user actually doesn't have to be that hard. It's really not as daunting or complex as we tend to think. Anyone can do it, whether you're a designer or a developer, regardless of the size of your organization. It saves a ton of wasted time and effort, because instead of operating off of your assumptions, you're working from facts that are based in reality. It can be very cheap and also actually very enjoyable. And when we make decisions that are sort of based on these facts we find rather than assumptions, it's much easier to back them up when we're presenting our work to other people. So this is a quote from the incredible book, Just Enough Research by Erica Hall. And in it, she says that our goal should be, when we're doing research, to really just make friends with reality. We want to cultivate a desire to be proven wrong as quickly as possible and for the lowest cost. So I want to talk a little bit about that. How do we go about sort of making friends with reality? And by that, I mean, how do we gain a real understanding of the people using our designs and then use this understanding to create more effective solutions? To quote that same article I referenced earlier from Jared, the single most effective thing we can do is just increase the amount of exposure that we have to the people that are using our product. Everyone has access to their users in some form or another, and the kind of research we do doesn't have to be all or nothing. There's sort of a spectrum of the amount of resources that are required and the amount of time that's involved in getting close to the users. So everybody can do something that's sort of on this list or take advantage of some of the tools that are here. They all kind of fall, like I said, along a spectrum of how much work is involved and sort of the budget or how much support you need from your organization. So we'll start with the most effective method of user research, which is in-person interviews. Really just the best information that you can get will come from sitting down in front of a person who uses your product day to day. You can have a conversation with them about what their life is like and really get more context for how your product fits in to what they do. Is it something that they access first thing in the morning when they wake up, or do they really only need it once a week when they're presenting to their boss? And having that sort of larger context is really going to inform the way we create our designs. You're also looking to sort of just listen for what their unmet needs are or what their goals are that you might not yet be aware of. And then you want to watch them just use the product. I had to get an owl in there at some point. Owls are kind of my thing. But really, the goal is just to sort of witness what their successes are, their frustrations. And then when you see that on their face, you're going to create sort of an emotional connection to the user. Maybe not the same kind of emotional connection that we're creating with this owl, but you will kind of feel their pain when you're watching them struggle to use your product. There's no better way to sort of make friends with reality than to sit down and watch people use something in the real world. So if you're looking to do in-person testing, I can recommend a piece of software called Silverback. The awesome thing about Silverback is that it uses the iSight camera on your computer or the user's computer to record their facial expressions, so you're getting that sort of emotional connection to their frustration or their delight when they use your product. It also records screen inputs. It allows you to take notes. And the nice thing is that then you can kind of review these sessions later and share them with your team. If you don't have access to real users, if your organization won't let you do outreach or to try to recruit people to come in for interviews, or maybe you're working remotely, you can always interview people that are in your life that are kind of closest to your target audience. So if you have an uncle who needs a video hosting platform, for example, you can sit down with him and ask him to sort of sign up for Sprout Video and watch what his experience is like. The other important thing to remember is that you can do the same thing with the competition. When you are watching and recording as someone signs up for your competitor's sites, you can easily compare their experience to the experience of using your site. And then also you sort of gain a larger feeling for what it's like to be a person who's shopping for this service. So, assuming that you are unable to do research with somebody in person or interview them in person, there's other great tools you can use for remote testing. Two that I've seen, or the one that I've seen and used is usertesting.com. But the great thing about this service is that it does allow you to sort of recruit users to do a quick test with your app. You can say, hi, would you mind trying out this new feature directly within your product? And if somebody's willing, then they are taken to the user test. But again, a lot of companies aren't really comfortable with interfering with the user experience in that way. So what user testing does is they have a panel of sort of experts that can fit within your target audience. So you can say, we want women who are age 50, who live in major cities, and they'll pair you with people that kind of match that description. And then they'll suggest tasks that you can assign for that person to do. And with this, you also get screen recording showing their inputs. The user can sort of type and say, like, I don't know what to do here, or I'm lost in this thing. But then you also get an audio commentary. And if you're working with one of their testers, they're very explicit about sort of, I am frustrated right now because I'm trying to find search, or I expect to be able to click checkout, but I'm having to log in. So user testing can be super helpful for that. The only disadvantage of kind of remote testing like this is that unlike when you're working with somebody in person, you kind of miss out on that interpersonal connection. You don't get to ask them questions like, how does this fit into your larger life? And you don't get to really visualize and see their frustration when they're up against a problem, or there's delight when they do something successfully. So sort of the next level down on the tier, the next best thing you can do is use what I'm calling an observational tool. We have started taking advantage of these at Sprout Video and found them to be very helpful. We're currently using FullStory and also in the process of checking out InspectLit, but they're both pretty similar. Basically what they do is they install a small script on your site that then creates a screen recording of everything a user does in your product. So this is really great for spotting the small changes you can make to just relieve moments of frustration. For example, when we first installed FullStory, right away we saw that new users were signing up, and the first screen that they would go to had a ton of different options on it. And Adam, who of course originally designed our product, our developer, had said, people really want to see what everything is they can do with the product right from the beginning. That way they know what all their choices are. But what we saw when we installed this software is that people were just frustratedly clicking on everything and going back and trying to search within the one search thing on the site for how do I upload. So that was something where within 15 minutes of seeing that, we decided to just take everything off the first screen and make it really clear. We changed it to a warm message that says, welcome, please upload your first video. And there was an immediate relief of frustration for new users. We saw a big increase in people uploading more videos when they signed up. So that's awesome. As I said, yeah, observational tools are great. The only disadvantage, of course, is that, again, you can't really connect with users on that interpersonal level, and you're missing the sort of audio commentary for what they're doing. So you can see their frustration or perhaps their success when they interact with the product, but you're not getting to hear what they're thinking when they're taking action. So last, I'll just quickly mention analytics. I'm not going to talk about what tools are available because we're all kind of familiar with Google Analytics, but I'll just say this. Google Analytics is great because it's free, and it does give us sort of useful qualitative behavior for how people tend to behave. It can answer questions like, what's the next page that people go to after they arrive at the homepage, or what percentage of users are visiting pricing, which is great. The only problem is that it tells us what is happening, but we have absolutely no insight into why. And it really removes the sort of human connection from what's happening on our site. So it's more difficult to make decisions when the data is abstracted in that way. OK, so beyond kind of all these different little elements of software that can make it easier for you to get exposure to the users, maybe some of you are thinking that your organization is really slow to change, really resistant to trying out new tools, and there's pretty much no way you're going to get budget for one of these services. The awesome thing is that you can still get more familiar with your users just by using the communications with them that you already have. So sort of the single best thing you can do to increase exposure to users is to just make yourself very easy to reach by the users. Having people who want to send you feedback or questions or even hate mail is actually really great, and you're incredibly lucky if that's the situation you're in. A lot of people spend a ton of time and money trying to solicit input from people. So having links to contact all over the place, like we do on Sprout Video, has been super helpful. We also have support chat available during business hours. And the other thing we do that's really cool is whenever anyone signs up for an account, we send them an email like this. And I'm not going to read it to you, but basically the point of the email is that we're not reaching out and saying, we hope you use us, like here's how much it costs, here's the features you check out. It's this very personalized thing. It's a plain text email with no branding, and it just says, please tell us what your goals are and what it is that you need video hosting for, and how can we help you? And the responses that we get to this are incredible. Like, I don't have to sit down with a lot of users to know what it is that people are looking for when they sign up, because they respond directly to our head of marketing / customer support person, Courtney. So yeah, we also send a similar email when people cancel. It's not just like, all right, we're sorry to see you go. It's like, what could we have done differently? What do our competitors offer that we don't, if that's the reason you chose to cancel? And again, our goals for conversations with our users are all based in empathy. It's about conversion, because understanding user needs allows us to create better products, which allows us to increase our conversion. But the emails are not structured in a way that says that are salesy or say please sign up. We're simply trying to connect with users on an interpersonal level, listen for their unmet needs, find out what their frustrations are, and get rid of our own assumptions and take those out of the picture. So the other cool thing that we do, everybody within the company tracks and has access to every user communication. And when we get a tweet from somebody that's requesting a support feature or saying there's a thing that's frustrating them, we use a combination of Help Scout, which is our support software, and just simply Google Docs to kind of tag and track what those inputs are. And this has been really helpful for example, when we were designing the marketing site, I could look back in our history and see anytime someone had emailed us and said, I can't figure out how much you cost, or I'm frustrated because I want to know about your analytics features, but your homepage doesn't tell me anything about it. So just kind of tracking and tagging support in this way has been really helpful in informing my decisions whenever I'm designing something new. The thing is, this doesn't have to be a huge undertaking. You don't have to spend all of your time reading support emails or conducting, in-person interviews. Even if you just decide to set aside 15 minutes every morning while you're having your coffee when you get into work and read some support tickets that came in overnight or see what emails people have been sending you. You can also just kind of get the notifications for your social streams, because people tend to be really vocal about what they think about your product on there. Another thing I've done and had success with at other companies is just saying to our sales team, I'd like to sit in with you on a sales call once a week, and I won't speak, but I just want to better understand how people talk about what they need. I want to hear the language they use when they're describing it, and be able to connect with users, associate a user with a real human being. And a lot of times, people are excited and happy to have you do this. So let's say you've done all this. You've gone about increasing your exposure to users, and as a result, you now have all this empathy. You might be wondering, okay, so what do I do with all that, or what do I get from it? As we kind of talked about, understanding your users gives you constraints for working within your designs that are actually useful to you. When you know what the needs are around your product and what sort of goals people have, you can design something in a more meaningful way than just trying to make it visually appealing or to increase a certain bottom line. Although the last two, the bottom line and the user needs, are connected, as we'll discuss. The other awesome thing you get from all this exposure to users and empathy is just better content. When you listen to how people describe their needs, later, when you're trying to communicate how you can meet those needs, you can do it in their tone and their language. The process of getting critiques of your design becomes a lot easier when you work this way, because everybody has a shared perspective to give input from. It's less subjective when you're giving a walkthrough. You're not saying, oh, I made this choice because the Google Material Design Guidelines say to. You can say instead, I made this choice because Mary, here's her Twitter handle, here's what she looks like, said that she needed to know what our security features were in order to choose a video host. It just makes the walkthroughs that you're giving or the way you're talking about your design choices much more based in sort of reality than, oh, I did this because I love this font, which stakeholders don't care about. The other awesome thing is that the feedback you get then becomes more constructive. You know, someone might say, tonally, this feels off, and the reason I think that is because like these emails show how someone describes this feature. And that's a much better kind of feedback than just, you know, I don't like yellow, which doesn't relate to user needs or goals at all. And as I mentioned a little bit before, the other awesome thing about working this way is that it enables you to make sort of iterative changes to your designs rather than doing these huge redesigns that are kind of based in business goals, and then you relaunch something big, and then you wait to see if the conversion rate goes up a percent. That doesn't really give you the kind of feedback you need to just be continuously improving your product. And when you're using tools like this, you can make a change and then immediately see if someone's process gets easier or the way they interact with your app gets simpler. So for me, perhaps the most rewarding thing about kind of applying user empathy has been that it's given me more of a purpose for the work that I do. When I'm struggling to stay focused on a feature or to feel motivated about it, I can search and find all the requests that people have made for this thing. Or I can look back to that user interview where I first realized, oh, we can do this better. There's a better way for this to work for that person. And because I don't see the users as this sort of anonymous, faceless mob, but as like real people, it's much more rewarding to do these kind of small changes that may not seem like much, but I know that they're improving the real lives of everyday people. And the last thing I sort of want to say about this, to persuade you all not to groan the next time you think about empathy, is that this talk has been focused on sort of how empathy relates to users, but when you start practicing these things over and over of connecting with people on an interpersonal level, listening for their unmet needs and goals, observing their frustrations and their successes, or just getting rid of your own assumptions, it just makes you a better communicator in every aspect of what you do. Like, pause for a moment and imagine what it would be like if you went into every meeting with these goals and you thought, I'm going to listen to the people in the room in a way that respects, you know, their experience, and I really want to suspend my own beliefs for a minute to hear what it is that they need. So applying empathy has the potential to be transformative within our own designs, but it also can just elevate the quality of your organization on the whole. So just very quickly, I want to talk a little bit about the resources that kind of informed all this research I've been doing, starting with Practical Empathy, which is a new book that just came out by Indy Young. It's awesome. It delves much more deeply into empathy than I could in this talk, and talks not just about how it works with users, but within organizations and product strategy and kind of across all these different disciplines. So that's awesome. I mentioned Just Enough Research by Erica Hall, which is a really great resource if you want to kind of better understand the methods of practicing research and really the reasons why we should be doing it. These two books are both just incredible, and everyone should read them. They're helpful for sort of understanding how we can frame the research that we're gaining in terms of business goals and how we can use what we found through talking to our users to kind of get stakeholders on board with our design solutions. And that's something I wish I could talk about. Maybe I'll do a workshop about it at some point. But anyways, the other source that I got a lot of information from was UIE.com, which is Jared Spool's site. And he has tons of talks and talks that he's done and other people have done, articles, you know, recommended reading, things like that on there. So definitely check that out. And oops. That's it for me. Thank you so much, you guys, and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you so much, Megan.